The military police truck's headlights cut through the October fog, turning the narrow French road into a tunnel of pale light. Inside the back, Sergeant James William Carter sat with his hands clenched between his knees, feeling the cold metal bench through his uniform. Two armed guards flanked him, their rifles pointed at the floor but ready. He had been absent without leave for 47 days. The charge was desertion in time of war. The penalty could be death. But as the truck rumbled toward the stockade, James thought only of the farmhouse 3 miles behind them, where a woman and a 3-month-old baby were waking up to find him gone. He had left before dawn, walking out voluntarily, surrendering himself to save them from what was coming. The guards did not speak. They did not need to. Everyone knew what happened to soldiers who broke the rules, especially when those rules involved French women. Especially when those rules involved children. 8 months earlier, in February of 1945, James Carter had arrived in the small town of Louviers, 30 miles south of Rouen, as part of the Allied occupation force. The war in Europe was entering its final, brutal months. Germany was collapsing, but the fighting remained fierce. James was assigned to a supply depot, managing the flow of ammunition and rations to units pushing toward the Rhine. It was unglamorous work, far from the front lines, but essential. He was good at it, methodical, reliable, the kind of soldier who kept his head down and followed orders. He had grown up in rural Georgia, the son of sharecroppers, and the army had been his escape from a future of backbreaking labor and Jim Crow laws. He sent half his pay home to his mother and saved the rest. After the war, he planned to use the GI Bill to study engineering. He had it all mapped out. But plans, he would learn, meant nothing when the world tilted on its axis. The town of Louviers had suffered under German occupation for 4 years. When the Americans arrived, the residents were wary, exhausted, caught between gratitude and suspicion. The Germans had taken everything: food, supplies, dignity. Some townspeople had collaborated, others had resisted quietly. Many had simply survived. The Americans brought chocolate and cigarettes, jazz music, and loud confidence. They also brought new rules. Soldiers were forbidden from fraternizing with local women beyond polite interaction. The army wanted discipline, order, no complications, but war makes complications inevitable. James first saw her on a Tuesday morning in late February. He was walking through the town square, heading to inspect a warehouse, when he noticed a young woman struggling with a broken cart wheel. Potatoes had spilled across the cobblestones. She was trying to gather them before they rolled into the gutter. Her coat was threadbare, patched at the elbows. Her hands were red from cold. Without thinking, James stopped and knelt beside her, scooping up potatoes and placing them carefully back into her basket. She looked up, startled, her green eyes meeting his. "Merci," she said softly, "thank you." Her name was Marguerite Fontaine. She was 23 years old and lived on a small farm outside of town with her elderly father. Her mother had died during the occupation, from pneumonia that could have been cured if medicine had been available. Her 2 brothers had been taken to work in German factories and had not returned. She and her father survived by growing vegetables and keeping a few chickens. It was a hardscrabble existence, every day a negotiation with hunger and cold. James helped her repair the cartwheel using wire from his pack. She watched him work, curious but cautious. When he finished, she thanked him again, this time in halting English. "You are kind," she said. He smiled, a rare expression for him. "Just doing what's right, ma'am." She tilted her head slightly, as if the word ma'am was foreign and fascinating. Then she gathered her cart and walked away, limping slightly on her left leg. James watched her go, noticing the limp, wondering what had caused it. He told himself he would not see her again. The town was small, but the army kept its men busy. He had no reason to be in the square again. But he found himself walking through it the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that at the same time of morning, and each time she was there. They began to talk in fragments. Her English was poor, his French was worse, but they found ways to communicate, using gestures and simple words, sometimes drawing pictures in the dirt. He learned that her limp came from a childhood accident, a fall from a horse. She learned that he had never seen an ocean until the army shipped him overseas. These were small revelations, traded carefully, like people testing the ice on a frozen lake. One morning in March, she brought him a small cloth bundle. Inside was a piece of bread, dark and dense, still warm. "For you," she said, "you helped me." James stared at the bread, understanding what it represented. Food was scarce. This bread meant less for her and her father. He tried to refuse, but she pressed it into his hands. "Please," she said. He ate it slowly, savoring every bite, and when he finished, he told her it was the best bread he had ever tasted. She smiled, and he realized it was the first time he had seen her smile. It transformed her face, made her look younger, lighter, as if the war had briefly released its grip. The weeks passed, winter gave way to spring. The conversations grew longer. James began timing his supply runs to pass through the square when he knew she would be there. Marguerite began arriving earlier, staying later. They never touched, never moved beyond the boundaries of propriety, but something was building between them, undeniable and dangerous. He told her about Georgia, about red clay roads and humid summers, about his mother who worked as a laundress and could quote scripture from memory. She told him about life before the war, about festivals and harvest celebrations, about a town that had been whole and happy. They spoke about loss, about fear, about the strange suspension of living through history when every day felt both endless and fragile. One afternoon in April, James took a risk. He brought her a chocolate bar from his rations. She stared at it as if he had handed her a bar of gold. "For your father," he said. She shook her head. "No." "We share." She broke the chocolate in half, gave him one piece, and ate the other slowly, closing her eyes as the sweetness melted on her tongue. James watched her, transfixed. In that moment, surrounded by the rubble of war, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. James knew the risks. Fraternization was punishable by court-martial. But more than that, he understood the social reality. A black man and a white woman. In America, such a relationship could get him killed. In France, the rules were less violent but no less rigid. The army did not want its soldiers forming attachments. Attachments led to complications. Complications led to men refusing orders, deserting, choosing love over duty. He had seen it happen to others. A private from Illinois had been caught with a French girl and sent to the stockade. A corporal from Texas had gotten a woman pregnant and been shipped back to the States in disgrace. James told himself to walk away, but he could not. Marguerite had awakened something in him, something he had buried under years of discipline and survival. She made him feel seen. Not as a soldier, not as a black man in a white man's army, but as himself, as James. One evening in May, as the sun set over the damaged rooftops, she asked him a question. "When war ends, you go home," he nodded. "That's the plan." She looked away, her jaw tight. "I understand." But he heard the hurt in her voice, and it cut through him like glass. The next morning, James made a decision. He found Marguerite at the square, as always, but this time he did not stay at a polite distance. He stepped closer, close enough to smell the lavender soap she used, close enough to see the faint freckles across her nose. "I do not want to go home," he said quietly. "Not without you." She looked up at him, her green eyes wide with surprise and fear and something else, something that looked like hope. "They will not allow," she whispered. "I do not care what they allow," he said. It was the most reckless thing he had ever said. It was also the truest. That afternoon, they left the town and walked to her family's farm. It was a small, weathered place, with a stone house and a barn that leaned slightly to one side. Her father, Monsieur Fontaine, was in the garden pulling weeds. He was a thin man with a gray beard and hands gnarled from decades of work. When he saw James, his expression was unreadable. Marguerite spoke to him in rapid French, her voice urgent and pleading. Her father listened, then looked at James for a long time. Finally, he nodded slowly and extended his hand. James shook it, feeling the strength in the old man's grip. No words were exchanged, but an understanding was reached. James began visiting the farm in his off-duty hours. He helped with repairs, fixing the barn roof, mending fences, chopping wood. Monsieur Fontaine spoke little English, but they communicated through work, through the shared language of labor. Marguerite cooked simple meals with what little they had, vegetable soup, bread, occasionally eggs. They ate together at a rough wooden table, passing bowls, sharing silences that felt comfortable rather than awkward. In the evenings, after her father went to bed, James and Marguerite sat outside on the stone steps, watching the stars emerge. They talked about impossible things, about a future where the war was over and borders did not matter. About a place where they could simply be together. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling the weight of her trust. One night in June, under a sky brilliant with stars, he kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, a question as much as an answer. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to cradle his face, and in that moment the war and the rules and the world beyond the farm ceased to exist. There was only this. Only them. They tried to be careful. James came to the farm only after dark, taking circuitous routes to avoid being seen. He told no one in his unit where he went. Marguerite stopped coming to town on Tuesdays, afraid that someone would notice their connection and report it. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves. In July, Marguerite realized she was pregnant. She told James on a warm evening, her voice shaking, her hands twisting together nervously. "I am with child," she said in halting English. Your child, James felt the world tilt. Fear and joy and terror collided in his chest. A child, his child, their child. In different circumstances, it would have been cause for celebration. But here now it was a catastrophe. A pregnancy made everything harder, more complicated, more dangerous. If the army found out, James would face immediate court-martial. If the townspeople found out, Marguerite would be shamed, ostracized, possibly worse. He took her hands in his, steadying them. "We will figure this out," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I promise you we will figure this out." But even as he spoke, he knew the promise might be impossible to keep. The war in Europe ended in May, but the occupation continued. Soldiers were being reassigned, some sent to the Pacific, others back to the States. James knew his time in France was limited. He applied for extended duty, citing supply management needs, and was granted a temporary reprieve. But it would not last. The army was demobilizing rapidly. By August, units were shipping out weekly. James began to plan. He had saved nearly $2,000, a fortune by his standards. It was enough to start a life if they could find a place that would accept them. He investigated possibilities. Canada had more lenient immigration policies. England was a possibility, though still difficult. America was out of the question. Even if they could get Marguerite into the country, the laws against interracial marriage existed in most states. They would be fugitives in his own homeland. One option remained: staying in France. James could desert, disappear into the countryside, live under a false name. It was risky. Deserters were hunted. If caught, he would face years in prison, possibly execution. But it was the only option that kept them together. In September, Marguerite's pregnancy began to show. She wore loose clothing and avoided town completely. Her father said nothing, but his worried glances spoke volumes. The old man knew the danger his daughter was in, knew that the world would judge her harshly. But he also saw how James looked at her, saw the care and devotion, and it softened him. One evening, Monsieur Fontaine pulled James aside. He spoke in slow, deliberate French, and though James understood only fragments, the meaning was clear. "You take care of her, you protect her, or I will find you, war or no war." James met the old man's eyes and nodded. "I will," he said, "I swear it." The baby came in early October, 3 weeks earlier than expected. James was at the farm, had arranged to be off duty, citing illness. Marguerite's labor lasted 14 hours. There was no doctor, no hospital. Just James, her father, and a midwife from a neighboring farm who asked no questions. When the baby finally arrived, a boy with dark eyes and a powerful cry, James held him in his shaking hands and wept. He had never felt such overwhelming love and terror simultaneously. This child was his son, his responsibility, his reason to fight. They named him Henry Louis Carter. Henry after Marguerite's grandfather, Louis after James's father. Carter, the name that marked him as James's son, no matter what anyone said. For 3 weeks they existed in a fragile bubble of happiness. James spent every possible moment at the farm, holding Henry, watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way he gripped James's thumb with surprising strength. Marguerite recovered slowly, tired but radiant, singing French lullabies in a soft voice. Monsieur Fontaine carved a small wooden cradle, working by lamplight, his weathered hands surprisingly delicate. They were a family, impossible and real, but the bubble could not last. In late October, James's commanding officer summoned him. The unit was being reassigned. They would ship out to England in 2 weeks, then home to the States by December. There were no exceptions, no extensions. James was expected to report and comply. He returned to the farm that night, his mind racing. 2 weeks, 14 days. Then he would be torn away from Marguerite and Henry forever unless he made an impossible choice. James told Marguerite about the orders. She listened in silence, her face pale, Henry sleeping in her arms. When he finished, she looked up at him. "What will you do?" she asked. He knelt beside her chair, placing his hand gently on Henry's small head. "I am going to stay," he said. "I am going to desert." The word hung in the air, heavy with consequences. Desertion. Betrayal of duty, of country, of everything he had been taught to honor. But what was honor compared to this? Compared to the woman he loved and the child who carried his blood? Marguerite's eyes filled with tears. "They will find you," she whispered. "They will punish you, maybe," he said, "but I cannot leave you. I will not leave Henry. Whatever happens, we face it together." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You are a good man, James Carter," she said, "the best man I have known." For 5 days James prepared. He gathered supplies, food, money, forged identity papers purchased from a black market contact. He found a remote cottage 20 miles away, abandoned but habitable, where they could hide. He told no one his plan, not even the few soldiers he considered friends. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. On the sixth day, the military police came to the farm. Someone had talked. Perhaps a neighbor had seen James coming and going. Perhaps a soldier had noticed his absences and reported them. Perhaps it was simply bad luck, the random cruelty of fate. James was in the barn when he heard the trucks. He looked through a gap in the boards and saw 4 MPs approaching the house, their sidearms drawn. His first instinct was to run, to disappear into the fields. But running meant abandoning Marguerite and Henry to face the consequences alone. He could not do that. He walked out of the barn with his hands raised. The MPs shouted at him to get on the ground. He complied, feeling the cold mud against his cheek, the rough hands yanking his arms behind his back. Through the farmhouse window, he could see Marguerite holding Henry, her face pressed against the glass. Their eyes met across the distance. He tried to convey everything in that look, his love, his regret, his promise that this was not the end. Then the MPs hauled him to his feet and shoved him toward the truck. He did not resist. Resistance would only make things worse for her. The MPs searched the farm. They questioned Marguerite roughly, demanding to know how long she had harbored a deserter, whether she understood she was complicit in a crime. She said nothing, just held Henry close and stared at them with silent defiance. Her father stood beside her, his jaw set, his old hands trembling with suppressed rage. The MPs found James's personal belongings. Clothing, letters, photographs, evidence of a life lived outside regulations. They confiscated everything. One of the MPs, a young corporal with a cruel smirk, looked at Henry and made a comment James could not hear from the truck. Whatever it was, it made Marguerite flinch. Her father stepped forward, and for a moment James thought the old man would strike the corporal, consequences be damned. But another MP intervened, pulling the corporal back, muttering something about not making things worse. They finished their search and returned to the truck. The engine roared to life. As they pulled away, James twisted in his seat, straining to keep the farmhouse in sight. Marguerite was standing in the doorway now, Henry in her arms, her father beside her. She raised one hand in a small, heartbroken wave. Then the truck turned a corner and they were gone. James sat in the back of the truck, his wrists in handcuffs, his mind replaying the image of Marguerite's face. He had tried to do the right thing. He had tried to protect his family, and he had failed, or had he? He had given Marguerite and Henry 3 precious weeks of safety and love. He had shown Henry, even if the boy was too young to remember, what it meant to have a father who chose him over everything else. And he had made a choice that defined who he was, not a perfect soldier, but a man who loved fiercely and without compromise. The truck rolled through the French countryside, past fields and villages, toward the stockade and whatever judgment awaited him. James closed his eyes and made himself a promise. He would survive this. He would find a way back to them. He did not know how, he did not know when, but he would not let this be the end of their story. Love, he had learned, was not about grand gestures or perfect plans. It was about showing up again and again, even when the world said it was impossible. Especially when the world said it was impossible. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. The military prison at Fort Leavenworth was a fortress of stone and iron, designed to break men who had broken their oaths. James arrived in chains, stripped of his sergeant's insignia, his uniform replaced with prison gray. The guards processed him with mechanical efficiency, photographing him, fingerprinting him, assigning him a number. Prisoner 4782, that was his identity now, not James, not father. Not the man who had held his daughter while she slept, just a number in a system that had no room for love that crossed the wrong lines. His cell was 8 feet by 6 feet, a concrete box with a narrow cot, a toilet, and a single barred window too high to see through. The door clanged shut behind him with a finality that echoed in his bones. This was where men disappeared. This was where the army buried its mistakes. The first weeks were the hardest. James was kept in isolation, standard procedure for deserters, the guards told him. 23 hours a day in that concrete box, 1 hour for exercise in a cage barely larger than his cell. No letters, no visitors, no contact with the outside world. The silence was a weapon designed to make him question everything. Had he made the right choice? Had he destroyed his life for a woman who might forget him? For a child who would grow up without knowing his face. But then in the darkness he would remember, the weight of Amélie in his arms, the way Marie's eyes had held his, full of trust and terror. The sound of his daughter's heartbeat against his chest, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again, every single time. Some men were in Leavenworth for cowardice. James was there for the opposite reason. He had been brave enough to choose love. What James did not know, could not know in his isolation, was that Marie had not been silent. The morning after his arrest, she had walked to the American consulate in Le Havre with Amélie strapped to her chest and determination in her stride. The clerk at the desk had tried to dismiss her, told her that military matters were not consular business. Marie had refused to leave. "My husband is an American soldier," she had said in careful English. "He is the father of my child. He has committed no crime except loving us." The clerk had called security. Marie had sat in the waiting area and begun to nurse Amélie, making it impossible for them to remove her without causing a scene. After 4 hours, a consular officer had finally agreed to take her statement. It would go nowhere, he warned her. She had thanked him and returned the next day with a letter, and the day after that, and the day after that. Marie wrote letters to everyone she could think of, to the base commander, to the judge advocate general, to congressmen whose names she found in old newspapers at the library. She did not know if any of them would care. She did not know if her English was good enough, if her words would matter. But she wrote them anyway, each one a small act of defiance against the system that had taken James away. Her mother helped translating the most difficult passages, addressing envelopes with shaking hands. Even her father, who had raged against the marriage, who had called James a fool for deserting, found himself moved by Marie's determination. "You are fighting the American army," he told her one night. "They will crush you." Marie had looked up from her writing, Amélie sleeping in a basket at her feet. "Then they will have to crush us both," she had said, "because I am not stopping." In Leavenworth, James was eventually moved to general population, assigned to a work detail in the prison laundry. The other inmates were a mix of deserters, thieves, and men who had cracked under the pressure of war. Some of them were hostile, viewing James as a traitor for abandoning his unit. Others were sympathetic, men who had their own stories of impossible choices. One of them, a white corporal from Alabama named Billy Hutchins, had gone absent without leave to see his dying mother. He had missed her funeral by 3 days, captured at the train station on his way back to base. "They gave me 5 years," Billy told James over the industrial washing machines. 5 years for saying goodbye. They worked in silence after that, the roar of the machines making conversation impossible. But James felt less alone. He was not the only one who had chosen love over duty. He was just the only one who had chosen it across a color line. 6 months into his sentence, James received his first letter. The guards brought it to him during evening count, a thin envelope that had been opened and read by the censors before reaching him. His hands shook as he unfolded the single page. It was from Marie, written in English that stumbled and soared in equal measure. "My love," it began, "Amélie has your eyes. Every day I see you in her face. Every day I tell her about her brave father who chose us over everything. I am fighting for you. I will not stop fighting for you. We are waiting. We will always be waiting." There was no photograph, no drawing, nothing the censors might have confiscated. Just words on paper that felt like water to a man dying of thirst. James read the letter 7 times before lights out. He folded it carefully and hid it under his mattress, a talisman against despair. She had not forgotten him. She was still fighting. That meant he could not give up. What neither James nor Marie knew was that her letters had found an unlikely ally. Captain Robert Harrison, the officer who had ordered James to abandon his family, had been transferred stateside after the reduction of forces in France. He had tried to forget about the sergeant who had defied him, tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing, but the memory haunted him, the look in James's eyes when he had said, "Then I choose them." Harrison had 3 children of his own, all waiting for him in Virginia. He had held them the night he returned, felt their small arms around his neck, and thought about a little girl in France who would never know her father's embrace. It ate at him. 3 months after James's court-martial, Harrison received one of Marie's letters. She had found his name in military records, tracked him down through sheer persistence. The letter was simple and devastating. "You ordered him to leave us. Now I am asking you to help bring him back." Harrison could have ignored the letter, should have ignored it, but something in Marie's words would not let him rest. He began to make inquiries, quietly at first. He learned that James had been a model prisoner, that his record before the desertion had been exemplary. He learned about the regulations that had forced impossible choices on soldiers with foreign families, and he learned that he was not the only officer who felt the weight of those choices. There were others, men who had enforced rules they privately questioned, men who had watched good soldiers destroyed by regulations designed for a different kind of war. Harrison drafted a letter to the Judge Advocate General. It was careful, measured, emphasizing James's service record, the mitigating circumstances, the changing landscape of post-war military policy. He did not mention his own guilt. He did not mention the little girl with her father's eyes. but every word was written with Amelie in mind. In Leavenworth, James had no knowledge of Harrison's intervention. He knew only the grinding routine of prison life, the slow death of days marked by bells and counts and the clang of steel doors. He worked in the laundry. He read whatever books the prison library had. He wrote letters to Marie, though he never knew if she received them. The censors were unpredictable, sometimes allowing his words through, sometimes returning them with black lines through entire paragraphs. He learned to write in metaphors, to speak of their daughter as the morning light, to describe his love as the promise I made in France. Sometimes the censors caught on and rejected the letters anyway, sometimes they did not. It was a game with stakes he could not afford to lose. Each approved letter was a thread connecting him to the life he had chosen. Each rejection was a knife cutting that thread a little thinner. The turning point came from an unexpected direction. A journalist named Sarah Mitchell, writing a series on post-war military justice, had learned about James's case through courthouse records. The story fascinated her. A decorated black sergeant, a French woman, a mixed-race child, a desertion motivated not by cowardice but by love. It had everything her readers wanted: romance, injustice, the collision of war and humanity. She requested an interview with James. The military denied it. She requested documents under the Freedom of Information Act. They heavily redacted them. So she went to France instead, tracking down Marie through consular records and local inquiries. She found her in the apartment where James had once lived, where Amelie now took her first steps across the same worn floorboards. Marie was wary at first, but when Sarah explained that she wanted to tell their story, that she wanted people to understand what had been taken from them, Marie agreed. If words had power, then she would give this woman all the words she had. Sarah's article ran in March of 1948, almost 2 years after James's court-martial. It was titled "The Sergeant Who Chose Love: One Man's Fight Against Army Regulations." The piece was sympathetic but not sentimental, laying out the facts of the case, the military's reasoning, and the human cost. It included a photograph that Marie had provided, not of James but of Amelie, a solemn-faced toddler with her father's eyes and her mother's chin. The caption read, "Amelie Louise, whose father is serving 5 years at Leavenworth for refusing to abandon her." The article was picked up by other newspapers. Letters began arriving at military headquarters, some angry, some supportive, all demanding to know why a man was imprisoned for loving his child. Civil rights organizations took notice. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People added James's case to their military justice campaign. Pressure began to build, slowly at first, then with gathering force. James learned about the article from Billy Hutchins, who had seen it reprinted in a prison newsletter. "You are famous," Billy told him, grinning. "Well, your daughter is famous." "Most beautiful prison baby I ever seen." James could not speak for a moment. The idea that strangers were reading about Marie, about Amelie, that their private pain had become public, it felt like exposure and vindication in equal measure. That night he received a letter from a lawyer with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, offering to take his case for appeal. The letter explained that new arguments could be made, that public pressure was mounting, that there was a chance, no promises, but a chance for clemency or early release. James read the letter 3 times, afraid to hope, unable not to. He had been in Leavenworth for 20 months. He had 58 months remaining on his sentence. His daughter would be nearly 7 years old when he was released. Unless this lawyer could work a miracle. The lawyer's name was Thurgood Marshall, and he was already building a reputation as the man who would one day argue Brown versus Board of Education. He saw James's case as part of a larger pattern. Black servicemen punished more harshly than white servicemen for identical offenses, military regulations applied with discriminatory vigor, families torn apart by a system that claimed to be colorblind. Marshall filed a petition for clemency, arguing that James's sentence was disproportionate, that the military's own policies had created the impossible choice, that justice demanded consideration of the circumstances. He submitted Marie's letters as evidence. He submitted testimony from James's commanding officers about his exemplary service record. He submitted the birth certificate showing Amelie's American citizenship through her father. And he submitted something else, a letter from Captain Harrison, taking responsibility for the order that had precipitated the desertion. "I told Sergeant Coleman to abandon his family," Harrison had written. "I gave him an order that contradicted every value we claim to fight for. If he is guilty, then so am I." The clemency petition moved through channels with agonizing slowness. Weeks became months, spring turned to summer. James continued his routine in Leavenworth, working in the laundry, receiving increasingly frequent letters from Marie as the censors grew less strict. She told him about Amelie's first words. Papa was one of them, taught through photographs and stories. She told him about their daily life, the small apartment, the neighbors who had gradually accepted them, her mother's failing health. She told him that she was learning to sew, taking in alterations to supplement the money his military pay sent to her. She was building a life, preparing for his return, refusing to treat his imprisonment as an ending. In one letter she wrote, "I am not waiting for you to save us. I am saving us so that we are here when you come home. We are partners, my love, even when we are apart." James folded that letter and kept it in his pocket until it wore thin from handling. In September of 1948, the Clemency Board reached its decision. James was called to the warden's office, a summons that could mean anything. He walked the long corridor with his heart hammering, preparing himself for disappointment. The warden was a hard man, career military, not given to sentiment. He looked at James across his desk and said without preamble, "Your petition for clemency has been approved. Your sentence is commuted to time served. You will be dishonorably discharged from the United States Army, effective immediately. You have 72 hours to vacate this facility." James stood frozen, unable to process the words. Time served, discharged, vacate, free. "Do you understand what I am telling you, Coleman?" the warden asked. James found his voice thick with emotion he could not contain. "Yes, sir, thank you, sir." The warden's expression softened just slightly. "You have a daughter waiting for you. Go be her father." It was the kindest thing anyone in uniform had said to James in 2 years. The next 72 hours were a blur. James was processed out of Leavenworth with the same mechanical efficiency that had processed him in. His prison grays were exchanged for civilian clothes donated by a church charity, a suit that did not quite fit, a shirt with a frayed collar, shoes that had been worn by someone else. He was given $20 in cash, his accumulated pay minus deductions. He was given his discharge papers, the word dishonorable stamped across them like a brand. And he was given a bus ticket to New York, from where he would need to find his own way to France. He had no idea how he would afford passage across the Atlantic. He had no idea what he would do for work in France, how he would support his family with a dishonorable discharge on his record. All he knew was that Marie and Amelie were waiting. Everything else was just obstacles, and he had already proven he could overcome those. He boarded the bus with his few possessions in a paper bag and watched Kansas disappear behind him. He was going home. Finally, impossibly, he was going home. In France, Marie received a telegram 3 days before James's bus would reach New York. It was short, cryptic, the language of military bureaucracy. Clemency granted, sentence commuted, proceeding to New York. "Will wire from docks." She read it 5 times before the meaning penetrated. He was coming home. After 28 months of letters and waiting and fighting, he was coming home. She sat down in the middle of the kitchen floor and wept, great shaking sobs that came from a place deeper than relief. Amelie, now 2.5 years old, toddled over and patted her mother's face with small hands. "Mama crying?" she asked in French. Marie pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, seeing James in every line of her face. "Happy tears," she whispered. "Papa is coming home." She did not tell Amelie about the obstacles that remained, the Atlantic Ocean, the cost of passage, the uncertainty of when. Children did not need to know about obstacles, they only needed to know about love. And love, Marie had learned, could move mountains. It had already moved the American military system. An ocean was nothing. The letter James sent 3 days later contained no poetry, no promises, just mathematics. The cost of passage from New York to Le Havre, $42. His current savings, $18.30. His monthly pay after desertion charges and debt repayment, $23. The numbers told a story his words could not. It would take him nearly 2 months to save enough. 2 months felt like 2 years when every morning he woke alone, when every evening he ate dinner at a boarding house table surrounded by strangers. He had told Marie he was coming, and he would keep that promise. But time, he was learning, could be its own form of torture. At the factory where he now worked, his supervisor commented on how hard he pushed himself, how he never refused overtime. James did not explain that every extra dollar was a day closer to his daughter, an hour less she would spend asking when Papa was coming home. He simply worked until his hands cramped and his back ached, then returned to his rented room to count his money again, as if the numbers might have changed while he was gone. Marie's letters arrived weekly, each one a lifeline James clutched in the darkness. She wrote of small things, Amelie's lost tooth, the way their daughter insisted on setting a place for him at dinner, how she practiced writing Papa in her school notebook. But between the lines, James read what Marie would not say directly. Money was tight. The bakery where she worked had reduced her hours. Amelie's shoes were too small, but new ones could wait. Marie never asked him to hurry, never complained, but James knew what waiting cost when you had a child depending on you. He began taking double shifts whenever possible, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating one meal a day to save the cost of the other two. His coworkers thought he was mad. The boarding house owner, a widow named Mrs. Chen who had fled Shanghai years before, watched him with knowing eyes. One evening, she knocked on his door with a bowl of soup. "You cannot help them if you collapse," she said simply, setting it on his table. When he tried to pay her, she waved him off. "Someone helped me once, now I help you." This is how the world works when it works right. It was the kindness that nearly broke him, this stranger's soup, this gesture that said he was not alone in his struggle. The factory where James worked manufactured textiles, and the machines never stopped their relentless rhythm. He operated a loom on the second floor, his hands moving with practiced precision, his mind 3,000 miles away. The other workers were immigrants mostly, Italians, Poles, a few Chinese men who kept to themselves. They did not ask about his past and he did not offer it, but word traveled in places like this, and eventually someone heard something, made a connection. One afternoon during the lunch break, a Polish man named Victor approached him. "You are the one who deserted," he said. It was not a question. James tensed, ready for judgment, for the lecture about duty and honor. Instead, Victor pulled out his wallet and removed a photograph of two small boys. "My son's in Krakow. I have not seen them in 4 years." He looked at the photo for a long moment, then back at James. "You did right thing. Family is only thing that matters." He pressed the photo back into his wallet like a talisman. "When you go to them, you remember Victor said this. You are not coward, you are father." The words settled into James like stones into water, creating ripples he had not expected. He had carried his desertion like shame, like a mark that separated him from decent men. But here was Victor calling it something else, calling it right. By mid-June, James had $37. Close, so close he could taste it. But passage to France had increased to $45, shipping lines raising prices as demand grew from soldiers returning to wartime sweethearts, from refugees trying to return home. 3 more weeks at minimum, possibly 4. Marie's latest letter mentioned that Amelie had started a countdown calendar, crossing off days until an arbitrary date she had decided Papa would arrive. "I do not have the heart to tell her we do not know the exact day," Marie wrote. "She is so certain. Children have such faith." That word faith haunted James. His daughter had faith he would come. Did he have faith in himself? Some mornings, exhaustion made his hands shake so badly he could barely button his shirt. The supervisor had warned him about the hours he was keeping. "You will hurt yourself," the man said, "or someone else." Tired men make mistakes around machines. But James could not slow down. Every day he delayed was another day his daughter crossed off her calendar, another day closer to the moment when her faith might crack. He thought of what Michael had said that day at Fort Dix. "Your family needs you alive more than the army needs you dead." James was alive, but barely living. There had to be another way to close the gap between $37 and 45. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen found him in the hallway outside his room one evening, swaying on his feet after a 16-hour shift. She took one look at him and made a decision. "Come," she said, leading him down to her kitchen. She fed him rice and vegetables, watched him eat with the focused intensity of someone too tired to taste food. Then she asked him a question. "How much more do you need?" When he told her $8, she disappeared into a back room. She returned with a small wooden box. From it, she counted out $8 bills, worn soft from handling. "Alone," she said, holding up a hand when he tried to protest. "Not a gift. You will pay me back when you can, but you will pay me back from France, yes, after you have seen your daughter." James stared at the money, then at this woman who barely knew him. "Why," he managed, "why would you do this?" Mrs. Chen's eyes grew distant. "Because someone did not do it for me. I had a daughter in Shanghai. When I left, I thought I would return quickly, bring her to America. But the war came and then the time passed and then, she did not finish, she did not need to. Your daughter is alive and you can reach her. You do not wait, you do not let time steal what you can still have." She pressed the bills into his hand. You go now." James booked his passage the next morning. The SS Liberty, departing July 1st from New York Harbor, arriving Le Havre approximately July 10th, conditions permitting. The ticket agent, a bored man with ink-stained fingers, processed the transaction without interest. But for James, the moment the ticket touched his palm felt like a door opening, like chains breaking. He had a departure date. He could give Marie and Amelie an answer. That night he wrote 2 letters. The first to Marie: I sail July 1st. I will arrive in Le Havre around July 10th. Tell Amélie her papa is coming home. Tell her to save me the biggest hug she has. The second letter was harder to write. It was to Michael, who had given him the card that changed everything. I am going to them, James wrote. Because of you, because of that card, I have a chance at the life I thought I had lost. I do not know if we will ever meet again. I do not know if you will face consequences for helping me. But I need you to know that what you did, it saved 3 lives, mine, Marie's, and our daughter's. If that is not worth the risk you took, then nothing in this world is. He mailed both letters before he could second-guess himself. The deed was done. The date was set. In 3 weeks, he would cross an ocean to keep a promise he had made to a woman holding their newborn daughter in a bombed French city. Some promises were worth any price. The final 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and goodbye. James worked his notice at the factory. He owed them that much, and he needed every dollar until the moment he stepped on the ship. His coworkers threw him a small party on his last day, Victor presenting him with a bottle of vodka. For the crossing, he said, Polish courage. Mrs. Chen refused to let him pay his last week's rent. You will need money when you arrive, she said firmly. France is expensive, you take care of your family. He tried to argue, but she was immovable as stone. On his final evening, she invited him down for dinner. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who understand loss and hope in equal measure. Your daughter is lucky, Mrs. Chen said finally. Not every child has a father who will cross an ocean. I am the lucky one, James replied. Not every man gets a second chance. He left her his New York address, the boarding house where his mail would be forwarded, and she promised to write. I will want to know how the story ends, she said. The good stories always have witnesses. As he climbed the stairs to his room for the last time, James understood that this place, these people, had been more than a waiting station. They had been proof that the world still contained kindness, that strangers could become family, that hope was not a foolish thing to carry. July 1st dawned gray and cool, fog rolling in from the harbor. James stood on the pier at 6 in the morning, his single bag at his feet, watching the SS Liberty loom through the mist like a promise made solid. Other passengers gathered around him, veterans returning to European wives, merchants, a few families who looked as weary as he felt. A young woman near him held a baby, maybe 6 months old. She caught James looking and offered a tired smile. Going to meet your family? She asked. Yes, James said. My daughter, she is 3. Mine too, the woman said. Well, my husband and our daughter, he is French. We married before he was sent back after the occupation ended. I have not seen him in a year. She looked down at the baby. He has not met his son yet. There were so many stories like this, James realized. So many people torn apart by war, trying to stitch themselves back together across impossible distances. The war might have ended, but its aftermath was still separating families, still creating these painful gaps of longing. The ship's horn sounded deep and resonant, the call to board. James picked up his bag and took his first step toward the gangway, toward the ocean, toward Marie and Amélie, toward the life he had deserted an army to claim. His hands did not shake, his step did not falter, he was going home. The crossing took 9 days, and they were the longest days of James's life. The SS Liberty was no luxury liner, it was a working ship, converted from wartime transport, still carrying the ghosts of its previous cargo. James shared a cabin with 3 other men, all of them traveling east for their own reasons. They did not talk much. The Atlantic in July was moody and unpredictable, calm 1 hour, rolling the next. James spent most of his time on deck when weather permitted, watching the endless water, thinking about the last time he had crossed this ocean. Then he had been a soldier heading toward war, believing he would survive it and return home to Tennessee unchanged. He had been so young, so certain. The man standing on this deck was different. He carried scars that did not show, memories that woke him at night, and a bone-deep understanding that safety was an illusion. But he also carried something the younger James had not possessed, purpose beyond himself. He was not crossing the ocean for abstract ideas of duty or patriotism. He was crossing it for 2 people who needed him, who loved him, who waited. On the 7th day, a storm hit. The ship pitched and rolled, and most passengers retreated below deck, sick and frightened. James stayed topside, gripping the rail, letting the wind and spray wash over him. He had faced German artillery. He had walked through bombed cities. He had deserted his entire military unit. A storm could not turn him back now. Land appeared on the morning of July 10th, exactly as scheduled. The coast of France emerged from the haze like a memory becoming solid. James stood at the rail with the other passengers, watching the shoreline resolve into cliffs and beaches, into towns and harbors. Le Havre, he had been through this city before, briefly, during the war. Then it had been a staging area, a place to pass through. Now it was a destination. The ship maneuvered into the harbor, the process agonizingly slow. Tugboats guided them. Officials shouted instructions. Other passengers pressed forward, eager to disembark, but James made himself wait. He had come 3,000 miles. He could wait another hour. When he finally walked down the gangway, his legs unsteady from days at sea, he felt as though he were stepping into a dream. French voices surrounded him, rapid and musical. The smell of the sea mixed with diesel and coffee and bread. He made his way through customs, his paperwork in order, civilian now, no military status to complicate things. The official who stamped his entry papers barely looked at him. Just another American among thousands, coming to France for reasons the official did not care to know. James cleared the customs building and stood in the street, his bag at his feet, the morning sun warm on his face. Somewhere in this country, approximately 200 kilometers from where he stood, Marie was starting her day. Amélie was probably eating breakfast, counting down the days on her calendar. They did not know yet that he had arrived. But he would fix that very soon. The train from Le Havre to Reims took 6 hours, and James spent every minute of it wound tight with anticipation. He had sent a telegram from the ship 2 days before arrival, landing July 10th, coming to you. James, but he had not specified exactly when he would reach Reims. Part of him wanted to surprise them. Part of him was terrified. What if something had changed? What if Amélie, after so many months, did not remember him? What if Marie had decided that waiting was too hard, that raising a child alone was easier than loving a man who had brought so much risk into their lives? The French countryside rolled past the train window, green and scarred in equal measure. The war had left its mark here, shattered buildings, burned fields, towns still rebuilding, but life persisted. Farmers worked their land, children played in village squares. The world insisted on continuing. James shared his compartment with an elderly French couple who spoke no English, and he spoke minimal French, but they communicated in smiles and nods. The woman offered him an apple from her basket. The man fell asleep with his head on his wife's shoulder. Simple domestic peace. James wanted that. He wanted ordinary days and quiet evenings and the unremarkable miracle of watching his daughter grow. When the conductor called out Reims, James stood so quickly he nearly hit his head on the luggage rack. The elderly woman laughed and said something in French. He did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Good luck. James stepped onto the platform at Reims station with his heart hammering against his ribs. The address he sought was burned into his memory, 17 Rue des Capucines. Marie's latest letter had included careful directions. The bakery was on the ground floor of a 3-story building near the cathedral. She worked there 4 days a week. Today was Thursday. She should be there. He asked directions from a station porter, his broken French barely adequate, but the man understood and pointed. 20 minutes, the porter said, holding up 2 fingers then pointing down the street. 20 minutes. James started walking. The city bore its war wounds visibly. Buildings with missing facades, rubble piles not yet cleared, temporary structures standing beside medieval architecture. But the streets were alive with people, with market vendors calling their wares, with the smell of bread and coffee and life resuming. He followed the porter's directions, his pace increasing despite himself, until he turned onto Rue des Capucines and saw the bakery sign. Boulangerie Mercier. His feet stopped moving. This was it. Behind that door, Marie was probably kneading dough or serving customers or doing any of the 1,000 ordinary tasks that filled her days. Behind that door was the woman who had waited for him, who had believed in him when he barely believed in himself. James looked down at his clothes, rumpled from travel, stained with sea salt. He probably looked like a vagrant. But he could not wait another minute, not one. He pushed open the bakery door and a bell chimed. The bakery was small and warm, flour dust hanging in the afternoon light. 3 customers stood at the counter. Behind it, a middle-aged woman worked the register, and there, emerging from the back room with a tray of fresh rolls, was Marie. She had not seen him yet. James stood frozen in the doorway, drinking in the sight of her, older, yes, but somehow more beautiful for it. Her hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her apron dusted with flour. She looked tired and strong in equal measure, a woman who had carried the weight of 2 lives while he was gone. Then she glanced up. Their eyes met. The tray fell from her hands, rolls scattering across the floor. The sound brought everyone's attention to the doorway, to the tall black man standing there with a bag in his hand and tears on his face. Marie did not speak. She simply moved, crossing the space between them in 3 strides, and then she was in his arms, and James was holding her so tightly he was afraid he might hurt her, but he could not let go. She was shaking, or maybe he was shaking, or maybe they both were. You came, she whispered against his chest. You actually came. I promised, James said, his voice breaking. I promised you, the middle-aged woman at the register cleared her throat. Marie, she said gently, perhaps you should take your break now. Marie pulled back just enough to look at her employer. Madame Mercier, this is— I know who he is, Madame Mercier said, smiling. Go, bring him home to your daughter, she has waited long enough. Marie's apartment was a 15-minute walk from the bakery, and she did not let go of James's hand the entire way. She talked rapidly in English mixed with French, telling him about Amelie's latest fascinations, about the calendar on the wall, about how their daughter had announced to her entire school class that her papa was coming home from America. She told everyone you were a hero, Marie said. I tried to explain that the situation was more complicated, but she would not hear it. To her, you are the bravest man alive because you crossed an ocean to find her. James felt something crack open inside him. What if I disappoint her? Impossible, Marie said firmly. You are here, that is all that matters. They climbed stairs to the third floor of a narrow building. Marie paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She does not know you are coming today, she said. I told her you would arrive soon, but not when. I was afraid something might delay you, and I could not bear to see her disappointed. She took a breath. Are you ready? James nodded, though he was not sure he was ready at all. How did you meet a child who was yours but whom you barely knew? How did you bridge 3 years in a single afternoon? Marie opened the door. The apartment was small but bright, with 2 rooms and a kitchen. And there, sitting at a small table with crayons scattered around her, was Amelie. She looked up at the sound of the door, looked at her mother, then at the stranger beside her. Her eyes went wide. For a long moment no one moved. Amelie stared at James, her small face serious and uncertain. James's heart twisted. She did not recognize him. Why would she? She had been 6 months old when he left. Whatever memories she had of him were built from photographs and stories, not from real experience. Then Marie knelt beside her daughter and said gently, Amelie, do you remember what Papa looks like? In the photographs, Amelie nodded slowly. He is tall, she said in French, very tall. And what else? He has brown skin like mine. She touched her own arm. Yes, Marie said, like yours, she gestured to James. This is your papa. He came all the way from America, just like he promised. Amelie looked at James again, her expression shifting from uncertainty to cautious hope. She slid off her chair and took one tentative step forward, then another. Then she was running, flying across the room, and James dropped to his knees just in time to catch her. She hit him like a cannonball, her small arms wrapping around his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder. Papa, she said, muffled. Then louder, Papa. James closed his eyes and held his daughter, this miracle he had crossed an ocean to reach, this child who was his reason for everything. She smelled like crayons and milk and something indefinably sweet. She was real and warm and alive in his arms. I am here, he whispered. I am here now, and I am not leaving you again. That evening after dinner, after Amelie had dragged James around the small apartment, showing him every toy and drawing and treasure she owned, after she had made him promise 10 times that he was real and really staying, Marie put their daughter to bed. James stood in the doorway, watching as Marie tucked the blankets around her as Amelie fought sleep despite her obvious exhaustion. Tell Papa about the calendar, Amelie said. Marie glanced at James, then back at her daughter. You can show him tomorrow. No, now, Amelie insisted. She pointed to the wall where a hand-drawn calendar hung, dozens of days marked off with big X marks. I counted every day, she told James proudly. See, I was right. You came. James crossed to the bed and sat on its edge. You were very right, he said. I am sorry it took so long. Amelie considered this seriously. Mama said oceans are very big and America is very far. It is, James agreed. But nothing could have kept me from coming back to you. She smiled, satisfied, and finally let her eyes close. Within minutes she was asleep, one hand curled under her cheek, the other clutching James's finger. He sat there for a long time, afraid to move, afraid that if he let go she might disappear, that this might all turn out to be an elaborate dream. Finally, Marie touched his shoulder. She will still be here in the morning, she whispered. Come, carefully. James extracted his finger from Amelie's grip and followed Marie into the other room, the room they would share, the life they would build. They sat together in the small kitchen, drinking tea Marie had made, the silence between them comfortable and charged in equal measure. There was so much to say and no words adequate to say it. Finally, Marie spoke. I was afraid, she admitted. Every day I was afraid you would change your mind, that America would seem safer than France, that the risk would feel too great. I was terrified, James countered. Terrified that you would realize you did not need me, that you and Amelie were fine without me complicating your lives. Marie reached across the table and took his hand. We were surviving, she said, but we were not fine. She needs her father, I need you, she paused. What happens now? How long can you stay? Forever, James said. I am not going back. I have no reason to go back. Everything I need is here. But your family in Tennessee, you are my family, James interrupted. You and Emily, my mother will understand, and if she does not, then that is her choice, not mine. He squeezed Marie's hand. I know it will not be easy. I am a black American in France with a desertion on my record. Finding work will be difficult. There will be people who judge us, who say we should not be together, but none of that matters. The war taught me one thing clearly. Life is too short and too fragile to waste on fear. We love each other. We have a daughter. That is enough. That has to be enough. Marie's eyes shone with tears she did not let fall. It is enough, she said. More than enough. It is everything. The farmhouse they found sat 2 kilometers outside a village so small it had no name on most maps. The owner, an elderly widow named Madame Dupont, asked few questions. She had lost her own son at Verdun in the First War, her husband to influenza in 1918. She understood loss, she understood survival. When James offered to work the land in exchange for the cottage at the edge of her property, she looked at Marie holding Isabelle, at the way his hand rested protectively on Marie's shoulder, and she simply nodded. The cottage has been empty since before the war, she said. It needs work, the roof leaks, the chimney smokes, but it has 4 walls and a door that locks. That is more than many have right now. James extended his hand. Thank you, madame. You will not regret this. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. See that I do not, Monsieur Walker, see that I do not. The first weeks were harder than either of them had imagined. The cottage roof did more than leak, it poured during rain. The stone walls held cold like a vault. James worked from dawn until dark, repairing what he could with materials scavenged from abandoned buildings, wood traded for labor in the village. His hands, soft from months of military clerical work, cracked and bled. Marie kept a fire going constantly, boiled water for washing, made soup from vegetables Madame Dupont brought. Isabelle cried often in the cold. At night the three of them huddled under every blanket they owned, Isabelle between them, their breath visible in the frigid air. This is not the life I wanted to give you, James said one particularly brutal night, his voice rough with exhaustion and guilt. Marie pressed closer, Isabelle's small body warm between them. You gave us a life together, she said. Everything else we can build, but without you there would be nothing to build upon. Do you understand that? By spring the cottage had transformed. The roof no longer leaked. James had chinked every gap in the stone walls, installed a proper door with hinges he had forged himself in Madame Dupont's workshop. He had built a crib for Isabelle from salvaged wood, sanded it smooth so no splinter could harm her soft skin. Marie had made curtains from fabric traded at the village market, planted a small garden behind the cottage where early shoots of lettuce and radishes pushed through dark soil. Isabelle had grown, her legs chubby, her laugh frequent. She recognized James now, reached for him when he came in from the fields, her small fingers grasping at his face. The village had slowly, cautiously accepted them. Not warmly, perhaps, there were still stares, still whispers, but the baker sold them bread at fair prices. The doctor came when Isabelle had a fever, refused extra payment. Madame Dupont visited weekly, always bringing something, eggs or milk or cheese, never acknowledging the charity. You have made something here, she told James one afternoon, surveying the neat cottage, the thriving garden. Against considerable odds, you have made something that will last. But the past, James learned, does not simply disappear because you wish it to. It waits. It finds you when you least expect it. On a warm June morning, he was working in Madame Dupont's north field when he saw the vehicle approaching on the dirt road. An American military jeep. His blood went cold. He considered running, hiding in the woods at the field's edge. But running would only confirm guilt, would bring them to the cottage, to Marie and Isabelle. So he stood his ground, wiping dirt from his hands, watching as the jeep pulled to a stop and 2 men in American uniforms climbed out. One was a captain he did not recognize. The other was Lieutenant Morrison. James felt the world tilt. Morrison looked older, his face lined with exhaustion that went beyond physical weariness. Sergeant Walker, Morrison said quietly. Or should I say Mr. Walker? James said nothing. What could he say? The captain stepped forward. James Walker, you are under military arrest for desertion. You will come with us immediately for return to military custody and court-martial. James looked at Morrison, not the captain. You came for me yourself. Morrison's jaw tightened. I did not have a choice, Walker. There is always a choice, sir. You taught me that. The captain's hand moved to his sidearm. You will come peacefully or you will come in restraints. Your decision. James held Morrison's gaze. I have a family now, a daughter. She is 13 months old. Her name is Isabelle. Something flickered in Morrison's eyes, pain or regret, impossible to tell which. I know, he said softly. They told me everything when they gave me this assignment. The captain stepped forward impatiently. This is not a social call. You deserted your post. You violated military law. The penalty is severe. James finally looked at him. The military ordered me to abandon my infant daughter. What would you have done, Captain? The captain's face hardened. I would have followed orders, as you should have. James shook his head slowly. Then I pity you, sir, I truly do. Morrison raised a hand before the captain could respond. Give us a moment, Captain. The captain frowned. Sir, that is highly irregular. 5 minutes, stand by the jeep. The captain hesitated, then walked back to the vehicle, his disapproval evident in every step. Morrison waited until he was out of earshot, then spoke in a low voice. They sent me because I know you, Walker, because I was your commanding officer. They thought I could bring you in without incident. James waited. But they also sent me because I requested this assignment, because I needed to see you face to face. Morrison's voice dropped even lower. What they ordered you to do was wrong. I told them so. I put it in writing. I sent letters to 3 different superior officers arguing your case. James felt something shift in his chest. I did not know that, sir. Morrison looked away toward the distant cottage. Of course you did not, because it did not matter. Because the orders stood, because the military does not care about one sergeant's French mistress and her child. The word mistress hung in the air like an insult. My wife, James said quietly but firmly. Marie is my wife. We married in the village church 5 months ago. Morrison's eyes widened slightly. You married her. I did, because I love her, because she is the mother of my child, because it was the right thing to do. Morrison was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight James had never heard before. Then you understand this is not going to end well. Desertion carries a minimum sentence of 5 years in military prison. The maximum sentence is death by firing squad. Given the circumstances, given that you were ordered to report and knowingly fled, you are looking at the upper end of that range. James felt ice in his veins, but he kept his voice steady. I understand that, sir. Then why did you do it? Why throw away everything for this? James met his eyes without flinching. Because some things matter more than everything. Because my daughter matters more than my freedom. Because love, real love, is worth any price. Morrison looked at him with something that might have been respect, might have been grief. I wish I had an answer for you, Walker. I wish I could tell you it will be all right, but I cannot lie to you. Not after everything. The captain's patience had run out. He strode back across the field, his hand definitively on his weapon now. Lieutenant Morrison, we have orders. We are taking the prisoner now. Morrison straightened, his expression hardening back into military formality. But before he could speak, James said, Let me see them, my wife and daughter. Give me 1 hour to say goodbye. The captain laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You think we are going to let a deserter wander off for social calls? You are under arrest, you come now. But Morrison held up his hand again. 1 hour, he said. We will escort him to his residence. He can say goodbye under supervision, then we take him in. The captain's face flushed red. Sir, with all due respect, that is completely inappropriate. This man deserted his post. He does not deserve courtesies. Morrison turned to face the captain fully, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 15 years of command. Captain, I am still your superior officer. We will give him 1 hour to say goodbye to his family. That is not a request, that is an order. Am I clear? The captain's jaw worked, but he nodded stiffly. Crystal clear, sir. The walk to the cottage was the longest of James's life. The jeep crawled along the dirt road behind him as he walked, Morrison and the captain following at a distance. Every step brought him closer to the moment he had been dreading since he made his decision to stay. How do you tell someone you love that you are being taken away? How do you say goodbye to your daughter who is too young to understand why her father is disappearing? Marie was hanging laundry when she saw them approaching. She froze, a damp sheet in her hands, and James saw the exact moment understanding hit her. The color drained from her face. The sheet fell to the ground. She did not run to him. She stood there motionless as if movement would make it real. James reached her and without a word she collapsed against his chest. Her body shook with silent sobs. I knew this day would come, she whispered against his shirt. I knew, but I hoped, I prayed, I thought perhaps the war would make them forget, that enough time would pass and they would simply let you go. James held her, memorizing the feel of her, the smell of soap and lavender in her hair. I am sorry, he said, I am so deeply sorry. Morrison had the grace to wait by the jeep. The captain paced impatiently, checking his watch every few minutes. Inside the cottage, James held Isabelle for what might be the last time. She laughed, grabbing at his face with her small hands, oblivious to the gravity of the moment. Papa, she said clearly, it was one of her first words Marie had been teaching her. The sound of it, so innocent, so full of joy, nearly broke him. That is right, little one, he whispered. I am your papa, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky. You remember that, no matter what happens, no matter how long I am gone, you remember that your papa loves you. Isabel giggled, not understanding. Marie sat beside them, her hand on his arm, tears streaming silently down her face. How long, she asked. How long will they keep you? James could not lie to her. Years, at minimum 5 years, possibly longer. Possibly, he could not finish the sentence, could not say the word death in this cottage with his daughter in his arms. Marie's fingers tightened on his arm. No, they would not, they could not. You were trying to protect your family. Any court would understand that, but they both knew better. The military did not forgive desertion, not even for love. The knock on the door came too soon. Morrison's voice, gentle but firm. Walker, it is time. James kissed Isabel's forehead, breathing in her scent, baby soap and milk, and something indefinably hers. He handed her carefully to Marie, their fingers touching as the transfer was made. Listen to me, he said urgently. Madame Dupont will help you. The village knows you now. They will not let you starve. Work the garden, sell what you can. And write to my mother. The address is in the tin box under the floorboard. Tell her everything. She will find a way to send money. She will help. Marie nodded, unable to speak. James cupped her face in his hands. I will come back to you. No matter how long it takes, I will come back. Wait for me. I will wait, she said, her voice breaking. I will wait forever if I must. He kissed her then, long and deep, memorizing the taste of her, the feel of her lips against his. When he pulled away, she was shaking. I love you, Marie Walker. Remember that. Every single day, remember that. I love you, she whispered. Go now, before I cannot let you go at all. Morrison handcuffed him outside the cottage. It was regulation, but the older man's hands were gentle, apologetic. I will testify at your court-martial, Morrison said quietly as he secured the cuffs. I will tell them what you did and why. It may not help, but I will try. James nodded, his eyes on the cottage door where Marie stood holding Isabel, backlit by the interior lamp. Thank you, sir, for giving me this hour. I will not forget it. Morrison's face was grim. I hope it was worth it, Walker. I truly hope this was all worth it. James looked back at his wife and daughter one last time. Marie had raised Isabel's small hand, waving it for her. The little girl was smiling, not understanding, not yet understanding that her world was about to change forever. It was worth it, James said softly. Every moment was worth it. The captain opened the jeep door. James climbed into the back seat. The engine started. As they drove away, he twisted in his seat, watching through the rear window as the cottage grew smaller. Marie stood in the doorway until they rounded the bend and trees blocked his view. Then she was gone. The court-martial took place 6 weeks later at a military installation outside Paris. James was represented by an army lawyer who seemed barely out of law school and distinctly uncomfortable with the entire proceeding. The charges were read: desertion, failure to obey direct orders, absence without leave. The prosecution was efficient and merciless. They presented the timeline of events, the order to report, the documented failure to appear. The month spent living as a civilian in the French countryside. They called Lieutenant Morrison to testify. He told the truth, all of it. The original order that James surrender custody of Isabel, James's refusal, his disappearance. But Morrison also testified about James's service record. Exemplary, not a single disciplinary action in 3 years. A soldier who had earned 3 commendations for exceptional performance. A man who had worked tirelessly, who had never complained, who had been respected by his men and his superiors alike. This was not a man running from duty, Morrison said, his voice carrying through the courtroom. This was a man trying to protect his family. That does not excuse his actions, but it should inform your judgment of his character. The prosecution objected, the judge sustained, Morrison stepped down. When asked if he wanted to testify in his own defense, James said yes. His lawyer advised against it, said anything he said could only hurt his case, but James did not care about his case anymore. He cared about the truth being spoken aloud. He took the stand and told them everything, about meeting Marie, about falling in love, about Isabel's birth and the impossible choice he had been forced to make. I knew what I was doing was desertion, he said clearly. I am not claiming ignorance. I am not claiming the military did not have the legal authority to order me to report. But I am saying that sometimes there are laws higher than military law. Sometimes there are duties more sacred than military duty. My duty to my daughter to protect her and provide for her superseded my duty to the army. If that makes me a criminal, then I am guilty, but I would make the same choice again, knowing everything I know now. The courtroom was silent when he finished. The panel of judges looked at him with expressions ranging from sympathy to cold disapproval. The prosecution declined to cross-examine. What could they ask that would change anything he had said? The verdict came down 3 days later, guilty on all charges. The sentence, 8 years in military prison, dishonorable discharge upon completion of sentence, forfeiture of all military pay and benefits. It could have been worse. It could have been death, but 8 years. Isabel would be 9 years old when he was released. She would not remember him. She would grow up without her father, would learn to live without him, might come to resent him for the choice he had made. Marie would have to raise her alone, would struggle to survive, would face judgment and hardship every single day. 8 years. In that moment, sitting in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence, James felt the full weight of what he had done. Not regret, he still did not regret choosing his family, but the cost, the terrible, crushing cost. Morrison found him afterward before they took him to the transport. "I am sorry, Walker, I tried," James nodded. "I know, sir." "Thank you," Morrison hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This came for you yesterday. Your lawyer gave it to me to hold." James took it with shaking hands, Marie's handwriting. He opened it there, not caring who was watching. Inside was a single photograph. Marie and Isabel in the cottage garden, flowers blooming around them. On the back, in Marie's careful script, "We are waiting, however long it takes." We are waiting. The military prison was in the American occupation zone of Germany, a converted factory surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. James was processed, issued a uniform with a number, assigned to a cell block with 30 other prisoners. Some were deserters like him. Others had committed violent crimes, assaults, theft. The days were rigid and identical: morning formation, work detail, midday meal, more work, evening formation, lights out, no variation, no softness. No mercy, but every week a letter arrived from Marie. She told him about Isabel's growth, first steps, first sentences, how she helped in the garden now, her small hands planting seeds. How Madame Dupont had become like a grandmother to her. How the village had softened toward them, how Marie found work doing laundry for families, mending clothes, helping with harvests. How they survived. Her letters were lifelines. James read them until the paper was soft with handling, the creases deep as scars. He wrote back when he was allowed, once a month, told her he was strong, that he thought of her and Isabel every waking moment. That he was counting the days until he could return. 2,920 days, that was 8 years. He had served 112. But sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, James allowed himself to imagine the future. Not the years in this cell, not the endless days of work and silence, but after, when his sentence was complete. When he could finally walk out these gates and return to France. He imagined arriving at the cottage, older, worn, but free. Imagined Marie opening the door, her face transformed by joy. Imagined Isabel, no longer a toddler but a young girl, shy at first, not remembering him, but then slowly coming to know him, learning who her father was, understanding why he had made the choices he did. He imagined working the land beside Madame Dupont, building a life small but honest, teaching Isabel to read, to tend the garden, to be strong in a world that would judge her for her parents' choices. He imagined growing old with Marie, their hands wrinkled, their hair gray but still together, still choosing each other every single day. It was a dream, perhaps it was only a dream, perhaps Marie would not wait. Perhaps Isabel would never forgive him, perhaps the future would be nothing like what he imagined, but the dream sustained him. In this cell, in this prison, the dream was all he had, and it was enough. It had to be enough.